In life, there are forces that try to conquer and those that simply endure. Some seek power through control, others gain strength through understanding, and then there is a country that does not need to shout to be heard. It does not need to fight to prove its strength. It is not always in the headlines, but it is always in the heart of history. That country is India. Today, I invite you to journey with me not just through the pages of geopolitics or economics, but through something much deeper: resilience, spirit, and the indestructible identity of a civilization that has stood tall even when the world tried to bring it down. Why is India the one country the West cannot defeat? The answer is not in its weapons, but in its wisdom, not in its armies, but in its ancient soul. India's endurance cannot be measured merely through its political boundaries or military capacity. It must be understood as a civilization that has lasted thousands of years, evolving yet staying rooted. Unlike many nations whose identities were formed in the recent centuries, India's foundation is much older, tracing back to the Indus Valley, the Vedic age, and the rise of countless dynasties. Every empire that sought to dominate it, whether through war, colonization, or ideology, eventually faded, but India remained not as a monument of the past, but as a living, breathing force. This civilizational continuity is what sets India apart. The West, driven by linear thinking of conquest and control, struggles to grasp the cyclical and layered nature of Indian history. To defeat a country, one must break its core identity, but India's core isn't built on a single ruler, religion, or political system. It is built on the idea of dharma, the pursuit of balance, duty, and harmony. Even when foreign powers invaded, they couldn't erase the collective memory of the people. The British ruled India for nearly 200 years, but they could not destroy its spiritual depth or cultural roots. They tried to impose their language, rewrite history, and re-engineer India's education. But instead of collapsing, the Indian identity absorbed what was useful and discarded what was not. This ability to take in the external, yet remain internally sovereign, is a trait that no Western nation fully understands. Because the West often associates power with domination, they fail to realize that India's power lies in absorption and adaptation. Like a river that changes course but never stops flowing, India shifts, but it never disappears. The strength of Indian civilization also comes from its decentralized wisdom. Knowledge and spirituality were never owned by a central authority. Whether in a Himalayan monastery or a village temple, wisdom was shared and preserved. Philosophies like Vedanta, Buddhism, Jainism, and Bhakti arose in different eras, debated one another, coexisted, and even contradicted, yet none were erased. That pluralism, far deeper than political democracy, makes India intellectually undefeatable. The invader comes with one truth, India responds with 1,000 truths, and when one truth clashes with many, it eventually dissolves. Moreover, Indian civilization has a memory that runs deep. While modern powers often forget the lessons of just a few generations, India remembers stories, legends, and teachings that go back millennia. This memory acts as a compass. It allows people to withstand hardship, colonialism, poverty, and external pressure because they are guided not just by present needs, but by ancestral wisdom. You can imprison a body, but not a memory that is centuries old. You can control a market, but not a soul rooted in something eternal. The West often defines success by speed, expansion, and visibility, but Indian civilization teaches endurance, subtlety, and the unseen. That's why it survives. It does not collapse under pressure, it bends. It does not explode in revenge. It transforms pain into progress. When tested, it returns, not in protest, but in practice, rebuilding what was destroyed, redefining itself without needing permission from others. This quiet resilience is more dangerous to dominance than any revolution. To truly understand why India cannot be defeated, one must stop looking at it as a country in the conventional sense. It is a consciousness. And you cannot defeat consciousness. You can fight borders, armies, and governments. But how do you defeat an idea that has no single shape, that exists in temples and tech hubs, in scriptures and software, in meditation and mathematics? The West tried, and every time it failed, not because India fought back with might, but because it never gave away its essence. India's strength has never been built on the impulse to react instantly or to dominate hastily. Instead, it is grounded in a principle often misunderstood by the West: strategic patience. This patience is not weakness, nor is it inaction. It is a conscious, time-tested approach deeply rooted in Indian philosophy, diplomacy, and culture. While Western powers often value immediacy, swift retaliation, and visible assertion of authority, India operates differently. It chooses to observe, absorb, calculate, and respond at the moment of its own choosing. This approach confuses those used to direct confrontations and binary responses, because India plays the long game, always. Throughout history, Indian leaders, saints, and rulers have demonstrated this unique capacity to wait, endure, and adapt before making a decisive move. From the ancient epics like the Mahabharata, where patience is portrayed as a warrior's weapon, to modern political strategy, India has embraced the philosophy that timing matters more than speed. It doesn't rush to punish, nor does it always rush to praise. This behavior can be misunderstood as indecision by outsiders, but within India, it is seen as wisdom in motion. When India does act, it does so with purpose, clarity, and precision, not emotional reaction. Colonial powers, especially the British, expected resistance in familiar ways: uprisings, coups, violence, but instead they found a different kind of resistance, one that moved like a silent wave beneath the surface. Indian freedom was not seized in one dramatic battle. It was earned through endurance, nanko, operation, and mass awakening over decades. Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolent resistance is perhaps the most iconic symbol of strategic patience in modern history. He did not match British violence with Indian violence. He exposed the moral weakness of an empire through quiet strength. That ability to suffer, yet not surrender, has remained a defining feature of Indian political and cultural behavior. In geopolitics today, this same patience plays out in India's foreign relations. It does not rush to choose sides. Whether between global blocs, military alliances, or economic deals, India weighs its options carefully, often taking its time before deciding. It refuses to be pulled into conflicts that do not align with its long-term interests. It speaks less and listens more. It responds when necessary, but it does not feel the need to react every time it is provoked. This unnerves nations that thrive on provocation and instant escalation. But India understands that power built on provocation burns fast and fades quickly. Real strength is the ability to remain centered while others lose balance. Economically, India's growth has followed the same principle. It did not follow the rapid liberalization or forced industrialization models pushed by the West. It opened up at its own pace, protected its institutions, and resisted being consumed by global economic trends too quickly. Even in the digital era, India has taken its time to regulate data, develop its own digital ecosystems, and nurture local enterprises before inviting global giants unrestricted access. This methodical growth may appear slow to outsiders, but it is deliberate. Because India knows that what is built patiently lasts. Socially, India has shown the same trait. Amid internal challenges, religious diversity, and political shifts, the country has not imploded. It has allowed voices to rise, debates to unfold, and systems to evolve, sometimes slowly, sometimes chaotically, but always from within. It doesn't erase its complexities in order to appear unified. It holds its contradictions together with patience until a new order forms. That is not something the West, accustomed to rapid consensus and polished unity, can easily understand. This strategic patience is not passive. It is dynamic calmness, a kind of inner mastery. It gives India the ability to outlast, not outshout. To endure pressure, wait for the right moment, and then move decisively. And in a world that increasingly rewards short-term aggression, India's greatest power may be this ancient ability to wait without fear. India's influence on the world has never relied solely on military strength or political dominance. Instead, its power flows through something far more subtle yet enduring: culture. This cultural soft power is not loud, not imposed, and not enforced. It is experienced, absorbed, and internalized. From spirituality to food, from music to philosophy, India's influence seeps into societies globally, often without people even realizing it. This invisible strength makes India unique because while borders can be challenged and economies can fluctuate, culture travels silently, reaches deeply, and settles permanently into the hearts of people. Indian culture has a way of crossing boundaries that politics cannot. Yoga is practiced in countries that have never set foot on Indian soil. Bollywood movies are watched by millions in regions where Hindi is not understood. Indian cuisine has entered kitchens in every continent, not just as food, but as an experience. Meditation and mindfulness, concepts rooted in Indian spiritual tradition, are now central to wellness movements around the globe. These are not exports that India pushes through power. They are invitations that the world has willingly accepted. That is the essence of soft power. It does not conquer, it connects. The reason Indian culture resonates globally is because it speaks to something universal. Its philosophies, whether from the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, or Buddhist teachings, address timeless human questions about life, suffering, purpose, and peace. These are not ideas confined to one religion or geography. They are open-ended dialogues that welcome seekers from all walks of life. As the world grows more materialistic and fast-paced, India's ancient wisdom offers an alternative, a return to balance, self-awareness, and inner fulfillment. This is a gift the West cannot imitate easily because it comes from thousands of years of spiritual practice, not recent invention. Art, music, and storytelling from India also reflect this deep cultural richness. Classical dance forms, ragas, epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata. These are not just entertainment, they are carriers of values, history, and identity. And yet, they are flexible enough to be reimagined and adapted across different cultures. When an Indian story is retold in Africa or a Bollywood dance goes viral in South America, it becomes something bigger than national pride. It becomes a global conversation. That is the power of culture. It does not fight for attention, it earns it naturally. Furthermore, India's diaspora plays a crucial role in spreading this cultural power. Millions of Indians living abroad carry with them their traditions, festivals, languages, and ways of life. But rather than isolating themselves, they often integrate while keeping their roots intact. This blending of identities creates cultural bridges in classrooms, businesses, politics, and communities across the world. Whether through Diwali celebrations in New York, yoga studios in Berlin, or Indian entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, India's cultural presence is expanding not through conquest, but through contribution. In global diplomacy, too, India's cultural identity has often softened tensions and built goodwill. Events like International Yoga Day, initiated by India and now observed worldwide, show how soft power can unite without preaching. Cultural diplomacy, unlike military pacts or economic deals, builds trust slowly but deeply. It creates emotional connections, shared values, and mutual respect. And once that kind of relationship is formed, it becomes difficult to undo. What makes Indian soft power particularly resilient is that it does not depend on a single institution or leader. It is decentralized, lived, and passed on through families, communities, and art forms. It is not a product to be branded. It is a way of life to be experienced. And because it is rooted in diversity of languages, religions, and customs, it has a natural openness that appeals to the world. India does not need to dominate to be respected. Its culture, carried by the quiet force of tradition and creativity, has already made its mark without a single shot being fired. India's economic rise is not the result of external intervention or colonial favoritism. Rather, it is the outcome of a long, independent, and often difficult journey shaped by internal resilience and self-reliance. Unlike many nations whose economies were built rapidly through exploitative empires or foreign imposed structures, India's economic transformation has come from within, guided by its own choices, values, and experiences. After gaining independence from nearly 2 centuries of British colonial rule that left the country impoverished and stripped of its industrial base, India chose a path that was cautious, deliberate, and deeply rooted in the idea of sovereignty. It resisted becoming a puppet in the hands of global powers, even when economic models were being dictated by Western institutions. In the initial decades after independence, India adopted a mixed economy with strong public sector institutions. This was not due to ideological stubbornness, but out of necessity. The country had to rebuild its industries, infrastructure, and governance systems from the ground up. It focused on agricultural reforms, food security, scientific development, and educational expansion before opening up to the global market. The process was slow, but it allowed the country to protect its vital sectors from foreign dominance and to strengthen internal capacities before exposing them to global competition. While the West often mocked this cautious approach as outdated or inefficient, it allowed India to retain control over its economic destiny rather than becoming dependent on others. When India finally liberalized its economy in the early 1990s, it did so on its own terms. It was a response to a financial crisis, yes, but also a conscious pivot toward opportunity. It was not about surrendering to Western capitalism, but about integrating with the global economy while protecting national interests. What followed was a wave of reforms, entrepreneurship, and innovation that steadily transformed the country. But even during this phase of globalization, India maintained a balance between foreign investment and domestic empowerment. It opened its doors, but it did not give away the keys. One of the most remarkable aspects of India's economic rise is the strength of its services and technology sectors. Indian talent, especially in software, IT, and digital services, has become indispensable to the global economy. Companies around the world rely on Indian engineers, developers, and scientists, not because they are cheap, but because they are skilled, innovative, and adaptive. These achievements were not gifted through colonial ties or external funding. They were built through decades of investment in education, science, and intellectual capital. Institutions like the IIT, developed long before India became a tech giant, are proof that the foundation was always domestic and intentional. In addition, India's economic growth is fueled by its vast entrepreneurial spirit. Small businesses, family-run enterprises, and startups form the backbone of its economy. These are not subsidiaries of Western corporations. They are homegrown, often started with minimal resources, and driven by sheer determination. Whether it's a rural farmer using mobile tech for better yields, or a fintech startup transforming digital payments, these innovations are indigenous solutions to Indian problems, and many are now inspiring the world. What makes this rise even more powerful is that India has done it while maintaining its democracy, diversity, and federal structure. It has not had to sacrifice its identity to fit into the global mold. It has navigated economic storms, political instability, and social challenges without losing its sense of direction. The country's ability to grow economically without becoming dependent on a single global power gives it a unique position. It does not owe its progress to any empire, nor is it bound by the pressure of allegiance. That independence gives India not just freedom, but credibility. India's economic journey is not just a story of growth, it is a story of control, of reclaiming a voice that was silenced for centuries. It is about writing one's own future rather than inheriting someone else's blueprint. It is about rising without being raised by others, and that, in the eyes of history, is a far greater strength than anything imposed from the outside.